Welcome to I Am Nala podcast, brought to you by Nala Feminist Collective, or Nala Fem, where we discuss changes needed towards the liberation of African women and girls. Nala Fem is a Pan-African front of feminist leaders with a mission to foster, embolden, and mobilize women and girls from Africa and the diaspora for transformative feminist change. I am Aya Shebi, founder of Nala Fem, and on this first season of I Am Nala podcast, we talk to policymakers and activists to ask what should be done at COP27 taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, in a few weeks. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome back to another episode. Today, my guest comes from Uganda, a climate justice activist, founder of Rise Up Movement, and a council member of Nala Feminist Collective, Vanessa Nakate. Welcome, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's good to see you again. Vanessa, as a young African woman yourself, let's dive into it. How does climate change really affect you on a daily basis?
Yes, the climate crisis is evident, for example, in my country, Uganda, and we have seen the different climate disasters like floods, for example, the most recent ones in the Mbale region. Of course, as a young woman who is advocating for a better world for all of us, it's frustrating to continue to see climate impacts unfold in my country and affect the lives of so many people and lead to the loss of lives for so many people. So it can be quite frustrating to see that disasters only continue to escalate.
And on the African continent, besides Uganda, what do you think the main key issues right now we're facing on climate? Climate change is affecting so many things in our lives, but what do you think the top priority is right now?
Yeah, there is, of course, a lot of climate injustice that is happening on the African continent, bearing the fact that Africa as a continent is responsible for less than 4% of global emissions historically. But then we are seeing some of the worst impacts of the climate crisis. So it's not just, the flooding in the Mbale region that's in Uganda, or the starvation that is happening in Karamoja that has left over 500,000 people with no access to food. But it's also about the drought in the Horn of Africa that has left over 20 million people with no access to food. The flooding that we've seen, in South Africa or in Sudan, or, the different cyclones that we've seen affect Southern Africa just this year, the tropical storm Anna that we saw at the beginning of this year. And all this in the end, causing massive destruction for so many people, causing a lot of, loss of lives, loss of property, people's farms, people's businesses being destroyed in the process. I think those are some of the things that we are already seeing unfolding on the African continent.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also had forest fires just recently in Tunisia, and it's been also a conversation to bring people's attention back to that climate change is real and it's happening right now and it's affecting all of us. So I want to go into the COP conversation. You were at COP26 last year. What did you see? On the one hand, that is a milestone and you were hopeful, okay, we're making progress. And what did you see as we completely missed this and leaders turned a blind eye on it?
Yes, what I remember at COP26, there were literally like two conversations happening. And one was with the people who are outside the COP and also the people inside the COP. So the people that were outside the COP, especially the different young activists, they kept on saying that we are heading in the wrong direction, speeding in the wrong direction. However, what we were seeing, what we were hearing from the people in the halls was that, there is this progress that is happening on the inside. And then I remember, I think the last week of the COP, most likely, there's a report that was released by Climate Tracker, and it was showing how, the world was on a pathway of 2.4 degrees Celsius. And this is something that is devastating for so many communities that are already suffering terrible impacts at 1.2 degrees. And the other thing I remember seeing, there were lots of commitments that were made by not only government leaders, but also business leaders. But as we speak right now, many of those commitments have not been met. Some of them have been, withdrawn. We've seen governments talk about withdrawing some of the money of climate finance in order to cover other issues. So it is sad that we are still not treating the climate crisis as a crisis, that is happening right now, even with the visible impacts, the visible challenges that people are experiencing. It is sad that we've seen more investment in fossil fuel infrastructure than in renewable energy since the COP26.
Yeah, and also budget going into other things like militarization, instead of prioritizing livelihood issues. So COP26, people argue that it has achieved perhaps the highest youth participation of all times, of all COPs. Since you were there in Glasgow, do you think there was a real meaningful young women participation, especially African young women? And if not, what do you think Egypt should do differently?
Yes, at COP26, there was participation of young people, but it wasn't enough, because one of the things that I saw is that many activists weren't able to make it to the COP, especially activists from Africa. And this was because of, issues of visa processing. Some people got their visas really late when the COP was coming to an end. Some were not able to get their visas at all. And the other issues were around accreditation and also funding. So those are some of the challenges that we saw, many activists face, including vaccine access for some activists in Africa. They couldn't attend because they didn't have the needed vaccines to attend the COP. And this was really, problematic. To me, it's really a challenge when the people on the front lines of the climate crisis are not in the rooms where decisions about our planet are being made. I think that it's really important to have activists from the African continent in these climate conversations, because the African continent is on the front lines of the climate crisis, and it needs to be not only on the front pages of the world's newspapers, but also on the front lines of climate conversations. And how can we make that possible? It is by having the representation, the much needed representation at these conferences. And as we head to COP27, many people have been calling it the African COP. And yes, indeed, it is an African COP. But what will make it an African COP is not that it's in Africa. To me, one of the things that will make it an African COP, if we have a representation of the communities on the front lines, a representation of activists in Africa, a representation of young women who are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis in Africa. And of course, this will mean accreditation, this will mean funding or visa processing. And I think that's one of the things that will ensure that we have a successful COP, because there is no successful COP if those on the front lines of the climate crisis are not, on the front lines of the climate conversations.
Yeah, accreditation, visa, and funding among the things that I 100% agree with you. These are challenges that we still see leading to COP27, and we hope that Egypt will solve these issues. Now, in terms of the Africa-Europe cooperation, in March, the European Commission announced its new comprehensive EU strategy for Africa, and the green transition and energy is one of the three key partnerships. But a lot of activists are condemning the EU countries for pushing African countries with new fossil fuel infrastructure, which can drag down our economy. What does, for you, the European Green Deal mean for Africa, and what should an African Green Deal be?
I think that we don't need an European Green Deal for Africa, first of all. I think we need, solutions from Africa. Again, it's important to note that the communities that are suffering these impacts, many of them know the solutions that they need for their communities. And that's why there is a need for, the engagement of these communities in the conversations about what solutions that they need. I think that when we talk about the European Green New Deal, it shows that Europe is on a pathway of climate leadership, and yet it's not, because we continue to see more investment in fossil fuel infrastructure, not only in European countries, but also in African countries. So there is a problem that emissions are being dumped, if I should say, on the African continent. And this is only showing that the Green New Deal could be just a paper or a document that has been put in place, but not followed with real action that shows that leaders are prioritizing climate justice.
Next question is aligned with this one because, you know, especially now with the Ukraine-Russia war, just a few weeks ago, Germany and Italy have been working to secure new gas deals with African countries as part of their strategy to wean themselves from the Russian oil. And indeed, Italy has reached deals with Algeria, with Angola, with Egypt and Congo and other countries. So what do you think about it, especially that you always say we don't eat coal, we don't drink oil or breathe gas? So this advancement is not really, for you, I think it's not really to our advantage.
You know, about Europe, European countries coming to Africa for gas, one thing that I can say is that one, European countries are saying that they are moving away from Russian gas and they are sourcing for, you know, gas elsewhere. But what we need is not a change of the source of fossil fuel. We need a change of energy, the kind of energy that we need. And changing gas from Russia to gas from Africa, it doesn't make that gas cleaner. It doesn't make that gas renewable energy. It's still destructive, especially for the communities, you know, that are in the places where that gas is to be got from. So it's really important to note that what we want as activists or as communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, we don't want a change of source for fossil fuels. We want a change of our energy. And that means really pushing and funding a transition to renewable energy, especially for the communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. There's some communities that are experiencing energy poverty right now. So for me, it's important to note that changing gas from Russia to Africa doesn't make it renewable.
Absolutely. So for your message to European leaders would be, you know, changing the source would not make it renewable. What would be also your message for them to make some more progressive decision now on the road to Sharm el-Sheikh?
My message to the European leaders, one is for them to understand that the climate crisis is something that is happening right now and something that is impacting so many communities right now. And for so long, we've talked about adaptation, but it's important to note that the climate crisis is pushing so many people beyond adaptation and it's causing loss and damage in very many communities, especially in the global south. So it's really important to note that loss and damage is happening right now. And some of the key demands of many young people and many communities are to put loss and damage on the agenda and to move it from, you know, just a conversation or a dialogue to real action, to putting real money in place to address the loss and damage that countries are experiencing. It is sad to know that a country like Mozambique had to take a loan in order to address the climate impacts that they experience because of the cyclones. Mozambique, which is not responsible for the climate crisis, has to take a loan to recover from the climate crisis. So there is really a need to talk about the justice issues in the climate conversations, and that means supporting the communities that did cause this crisis. That means putting in place a loss and damage facility. That means doubling up on climate finance for mitigation and adaptation and moving it from promises to actually making it visible and delivering it. Because we know $100 billion was promised, but it has not yet been delivered. So European leaders also need to move from commitments to move to real action, because commitments will not stop the suffering of the people. You know, pledges will not stop loss and damage from affecting so many people. Only real action will stop that. And real action in many cases comes through climate finance. It comes through a loss and damage facility. It comes through standing in solidarity with the people that are suffering terrible impacts of this crisis.
And what would be, because this is a partnership, right? EU, Europe, Africa. What would be the role of African leaders in leading this process?
African leaders definitely have a role in this because many times we talk about who holds what responsibility in addressing the climate crisis. And I think that sometimes we forget to talk about the responsibility of African leaders. It is African leaders who allow investments like for gas infrastructure or for oil or for coal in our communities. It is usually not the citizens that make these decisions. It is our own leaders that say, yes, we accept your investment in our gas or something like that. So I think there is a place for African leaders to see the investments that come into African countries, to allow investments that ensure that the people are protected and also the planet is protected. And what I've learned is that for any kind of investment, it is good for African leaders to ask themselves, will this be harmful to the children or not? The moment they see that there is a place of harm to the children, then that is not an investment to accept. So there is a place of receiving investment and allowing investment that protect the people and the planet as well. And I think there is also a place for African leaders to add their voices to the voices of the different communities in demanding for climate finance, for the loss and damage facility. I think unifying those voices, especially at COP27, will be so powerful for African countries when the leaders come together with the activists and the different communities to demand for the things that rightfully belong to our communities. I think it would be so powerful.
100%. I think European and African leaders both need to care, but I think this African Cup could be an opportunity for a unified voice of the African front. And we are actually, united. It's just that our voice needs to be louder and needs to be more bold, as you say. I want your thoughts now for the young people, especially in relation to young African women. How do you think they should engage in the fight for climate justice, especially those who will make it to Egypt? What concrete strategies or tips you can share with them based on your experience in attending a couple of COPs and how you advocate there? Because the process is not just to go to Sharm el-Sheikh, right? It's a lot of things that happens between one COP and the other and a lot of mobilization. And you've been doing that for this past year, mobilizing and making sure your message is consistent. So what would you advise the young activists who really aspire to advocate and make impact and make policy change in their communities?
Yes, for the young women or for the young girls that would love to really do something, especially at COP27, one thing I can say is that when you get to the COP, it can be very overwhelming because it's a very huge place. There's so many people, thousands of people. And if you are not careful, you may realize that you've moved around the venue the whole time for all the 2 weeks without actually making any impact. So I think when it comes to mobilization or organizing, it's good to be in touch or to be a part of a network of different activists or of a group of activists. Because this way, one, you're not alone, and second, you are organizing with different activists from different parts of Africa or from different, parts of the world. So for me, that's one of the things that I do when I'm at the COP, is that I try to find that connection with the different, activists at the COP and just work with them and organize with them, because it's very possible to spend all the 2 weeks at the COP and you haven't done anything. So it's a place of finding those networks. And also through those networks, there are always so many opportunities that come up. For example, media interviews. There is a huge window for media interviews at COP, and they're always coming in through those networks. And me personally, that's how I've been able to get some interviews at the COP, because when you're in that, for example, within a network of different activists, they'll keep sending the different media opportunities that are coming in. And they'll ask you if if you're interested, if you want to do it. I think that is another thing, to use those opportunities that come, to take them up and to tell your story, because at that time, media is literally looking for activists to say something about what's happening. So I think using those opportunities for media, and also there are lots of side events that happen. It's good to also get involved in some of those side events. So I haven't talked about the whole negotiation process, because at COP26, it was not easy for activists to get into the halls to actually watch or observe the process. So we don't know if it will be the same situation for COP27. But otherwise, there are still other ways to make your voice heard, to make your story heard and amplified. But it all starts from finding that network of different activists that are at the COP and being a part of them, because that will enable when they're organizing, when they're mobilizing, that will enable the different actions that are going to take place. And also that will give you access to the different media opportunities that come up to activists.
Do you have recommendations of networks, or does your network, the Rise Up movement, also kind of mentor some activists to join COP?
With Rise Up movement, we do hold different skill sharing every Saturday, and as we head towards COP, we are going to start having skill sharing around the COP, and to also help activists understand what COP really is. Because I think last Saturday we had one that was explaining about the whole COP process. So we'll keep having more. So Rise Up is really open. I think there are also different Fridays for Future groups in the different countries. Actually, that may be another place to find out through any Fridays for Future group in your country if any of them will be going, or if they can add you to a network. Because in the end, when someone in a group in your country adds you to a network, you find yourself in a network of activists from Rise Up, from Fridays for Future, from different groups. So you find yourself in the same network, but you can go through your national groups to get to those networks.
Absolutely. Or you can also, which we hope many young people go through, government delegations, so they can secure that they are in the negotiation table. And we hope to see you also among future government delegations. Are you thinking of going into politics, formal political processes through parliament or through ministries or through other processes? Is this something on your mind, Vanessa?
I haven't thought of it yet.
Are you inspired by what's happening in Kenya? Do you see how many women have gone to parliament in the last election?
Yeah, I saw specifically a young woman, I think 24, and that was really inspiring to see. And also a friend of mine and an activist was also, I think, rallying for one of the positions as well. And it was inspiring to see that.
Well, once you decide to do that, the whole Nala Feminist Collective is behind you. So we run your campaign, you'll get there.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be a part of Nala.
Thank you. Is there anything I haven't asked you like to share, maybe about your book or about your future engagement or an invitation? Feel free to share.
Yes, I can share about the Vash Green Schools project, which I started in 2019. And it involves the installation of solar panels and eco-friendly cookstoves in schools in Uganda. And it was started to help drive a transition to renewable energy and to also help schools reduce on the consumption of firewood. And so far, we've done installations in 29 schools. So it's been a lovely journey doing these installations, and of course, hoping to do more installations in different schools. And also to share about my book, A Bigger Picture. I think I have a copy here. Okay, the copy I have is in Italian, but it looks like this. Yeah. So I wrote a book last year, It was published last year, and it generally talks about my story as an activist, but it also carries stories of different activists, different young women especially, that are advocating for climate justice in different parts of the world, but most especially from the African continent. And it also shares different projects and different resources on how you can get to know the work of different activists, how you can support the work of different activists as well.
That's amazing. I need my copy, Vanessa. You know that.
Yeah.
We are so proud of you. Thank you so much for joining today's episode. I hope everyone you enjoyed listening to what Vanessa shared, especially about the road to COP27, and you got some strategies. And also thank you for your call to action to COP27 for both European and African leaders. To know more about her book, A Bigger Picture, you will find the link below in the description. You were listening to I Am Nala podcast, and see you in the next episode.